Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. Sex offender Jeffrey Epstein's files have exploded back into the headlines with millions of newly released documents exposing elite networks and power dynamics. More than 3 million pages of material have been released, including documents, images, and video. So, what does this mean for trust in traditional power structures? And is it only a matter of time before New Zealand politicians are caught up in the saga? Today on The Front Page, University of Otago International Relations Professor Robert Patman is with us to unpack the international ramifications. So, Robert, what is the latest in regards to the Epstein files?
Well, we've learned on Friday, the 31st of January, the Department of Justice under Mr. Trump have released 3 million files relating to the Epstein case, 180,000 images and 2,000 videos. So this has just happened in the last few days. So obviously it's very difficult to give a definitive verdict. It will take probably a month or so to work through the implications. Although Todd Blanche, the justice official who Mr. Trump has appointed to take care of this issue, he said that marks the end of the Epstein case in terms of documents released. The Democrats have quickly indicated that's not the case. There's supposed to be another 3 million documents. And these documents were released, by the way, a month after they were legally supposed to be released on the 19th of December. So the government had actually broken the law in not releasing them earlier. And I do not think we have heard the end of this by any means. The government obviously wants to draw a line over this. The government may not be successful in that attempt to contain the pressures for more releases.
And are they heavily redacted? Because I know that the first tranche kind of were, weren't
Apparently they are heavily redacted, but what we're learning is just the extent to which Epstein had embedded himself or interwoven himself into the social lives of so many prominent people, not just in the United States either.
And who are some of those people?
Well, I think the probably top of the list at the moment is Andrew Mountbatten, the former Duke of York. There is also connections with, well, we already know about the Clintons, but also Peter Mandelson, the former British ambassador to the US. And it seems the Princess of Norway, there seems to be quite a cosmopolitan aspect to Epstein's activities. He owned 5 properties, and one of which was in Paris. And obviously, he also had a private island, but he had close contacts, much closer than many wanted to concede, with not just Andrew Mountbatten, but also his former wife, Sarah Ferguson.
These names actually linked to these global business and tech elites and like you said, royalty and politicians. So they're obviously under scrutiny again now because of these meetings and correspondence that are coming up in the new files. What does that suggest about, I suppose you've already said he's very tightly interwoven in politics, but also what that means, it gives us a glimpse behind that curtain, doesn't it?
It does, but it also shows that this was highly organised. This was not just a very wealthy person occasionally seeking out the company of the rich and the famous. This was a pretty systematic effort, and we've only mentioned a few of the names, and I think until the files are given a thorough airing, I think it would be unfair to invoke names that have been speculated on. So another interesting thing, Chelsea, that seems to be floating around, although it hasn't been confirmed yet, is that there were perhaps 25 co-conspirators. So far, the only people charged with the sex trafficking crimes have been Ghislaine Maxwell, who's currently serving time for that offence, although in quite comfortable conditions, we understand. And also Epstein was also charged, but apparently committed suicide. So That was 2019. But apparently there is evidence that there were 25 other co-conspirators, and the charges seem to be that Epstein arranged for rich and powerful men to receive the intimate services of numerous women, both young and very young, and also adult. Some of those prominent men have not yet, their identities have not been revealed. So I think this is going to be a continuing story. It has huge implications, of course, for the US political system, but also I think has huge international implications as well.
I've seen posts of some people talking about various celebrities, everyone from Sydney Sweeney, Adam Sandler, one of the Backstreet Boys even, being mentioned in the files. But I suppose how damning is that necessarily, just being mentioned versus being implicated?
I don't think being mentioned is damning per se. I'm sure that Epstein did have just because you had contact with him, it doesn't mean that you participated in some of the services he provided. And some of the people have been seem to be genuinely shocked by the revelations about Epstein's life. What is surprising, though, is the number of people, even after Epstein faced the first set of charges in 2008, who continued with their friendship as if nothing had happened. And these are very prominent people.
Yeah, that timeline is probably being very closely looked at, hey?
Yeah, I think so. And there is still a suspicion, I think, amongst people at large, a lot of very powerful and rich people are being protected. And this is certainly the suspicion that's being directed at the Trump administration at the moment. Mr. Trump himself, of course, was Epstein's closest friend for something like 15 years before they fell out around about 2005. So, and Michael Wolff, who's been a biographer of Mr. Trump, I think he's written 4 books for them, and he appears in a regular podcast called Inside Trump's Head. He certainly has, documented quite extensively Trump's involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. I think the opponents, particularly the Democrats in the United States, and some Republicans, that there is a bipartisan move. It'd be wrong to depict this in polarization terms. There's a lot of Republicans who are deeply concerned about what's happening. And I think that's entirely logical, because I think most people may have different politics, but they may not have different moral codes. And what's interesting is that Thomas Massey from the Republican Party and also Rohana from the Democrats have got together, and they have been really a powerful force, and they're demanding the further release of the remaining documents. More than 3 million documents apparently have not been released, according to them. So I think this is a bit like Watergate. Those listeners and viewers who have long memories, Watergate started off with a sort of complete blanket denials and then partial denials. And eventually the president of the day, Richard Nixon, was forced to resign in disgrace. But it took place over 2 years. It didn't happen immediately. I have a feeling the Epstein case will probably make the Watergate case look quite small in comparison. It has huge domestic and international implications.
Well, and of course, with Watergate as well, the denials were almost worse than what happened in the first place.
Yes, I think this issue has the potential to fundamentally undermine the Trump administration. The Trump administration held off releasing those documents until the pressure became overwhelming. And then Mr. Trump, I think, although he put a good gloss on it and said that, he had no problems with that, he had no great enthusiasm to release them. And we've also seen splits within within Mr. Trump's political base, the Make America Great Again movement, or MAGA. For example, great Trump supporters have, one or two of them have parted company with him on this issue. They feel that he should have been much more transparent.
Mr. President, why wait for Congress to release the Epstein files? Why not just do it now?
You know, it's not the question that I mind, it's your attitude. I think you are a terrible reporter. It's the way you ask these questions. You start off with a man who's highly respected, asking him a horrible, insubordinate, and just a terrible question. And you could even ask that same exact question nicely. You're all psyched, or somebody psychs you over at ABC, they're going to psych it. You're a terrible person and a terrible reporter. As far as the Epstein files is, I have nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein.
How might the likes of Russia and China and the like use these files? Or do you think they're sitting back and watching quietly and waiting to see exactly how they can use or dissect this information for themselves?
No, I don't think they're sitting back. I think they're fully aware of what's happening, and they simply will not publicly disclose how much they know. One of the things that I think has caused great concern in the United States is that Epstein rubbed shoulders with many leaders, including the leadership of Israel. He's close friends with a former Labour Prime Minister of Israel, and also advised Mr. Putin on how to handle Trump. He made visits to Moscow. I think Mr. Putin and perhaps Mr. Netanyahu of Israel probably know more about the Epstein files than most of us do. They're very good blackmail material in there. And rich and famous people, as well as prominent people, there obviously contains some very sensitive information. And we mustn't forget about the victims in this case. And one thing that's caused real fury, there have been claims by some critics of the administration that it's evident, even with this release, the latest release of 3 million documents, that not all victims' names have been redacted, which should have been a given, really.
That should be, base one.
So a lot of people are going to be subject to their lives already having suffered in the most traumatic possible way. May have to go through that trauma again to some degree. So, we have to not see this purely in political terms, but in human terms as well. And it's very important those people get justice.
Do you think that they will get justice, though?
It depends on the pressure. I don't think you say they cannot get justice, but it's going to take a lot of political courage and focus and legal expertise to get those victims, many of whom were children when this occurred. I mean, we're talking about appalling crimes. And the thing that really concerns me, and I suspect many people when they think about this, is that Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein, they operated what appeared to be a global sex trafficking network, which involved a lot of money. And we also know that Epstein, he was very conscious to film many of these activities. It meant that he had compromising information and evidence on a lot of prominent people. It seemed to me very organized and quite systematic what Epstein was engaged in, which of course raises issues about whether Epstein, he dismissed claims that he was linked with Mossad, one of the world's most formidable intelligence agencies, but he wouldn't admit that even if he was a member. No, people in intelligence agencies don't go around and say, "Oh yeah, I'm a member of the CIA," or "I remember the, Mossad." It just doesn't work that way. By definition, they have to be discreet. So how convincing but I suppose, given the money that was available to Epstein and given his network of contacts of very prominent people, and what appears to be his associations with countries which, how should I put it, like Mr. Putin, an authoritarian state. So, I mean, there's a lot of worrying implications here.
Well, for New Zealand, I suppose it does all feel like quite distance. We're quite distant from it. It all seems a bit tabloid from our side of the thing. We're watching this and we're reading these things from the other side of the world. But why should New Zealanders care about this information and really stay on top of it?
Well, I think it's one of those issues that transcends borders because it shows you what can happen when power is abused. And we are not invulnerable to the abuse of power. New Zealand is consistently rated as one of the most honest and transparent countries in the world. There's Transparency International, which our viewers and listeners can go and have a look at online. We're often ranked in the top 4 in the world. So I don't think there's a major problem. As far as I know, no New Zealanders have been linked to these activities.
I think there was an Auckland professor who may have exchanged emails.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yeah, the Kiwi professor, as I understand it, has indicated his dismay about the activities that Epstein was involved in, which he obviously wasn't privy to or have knowledge of. But it does indicate, I think, the extent to which Epstein spread his activities internationally. And while he was engaged in what appears to be a global sex trafficking organization, he was also someone who connected socially with the worlds of academia. He was a prominent donor in US academic institutions, including Harvard. But he also had a genuine, it appears, interest in science, which meant he connected with many people around the world in various institutions. So he didn't confine his activities to the United States and was quite internationally orientated. Why should New Zealand be concerned? I think it's important that we remain vigilant about trying to keep money out of politics. One of the problems with the United States, as people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez have keep pointing out, is that following the Citizens United legislation of 2011, unlimited private money is available and it can be used in American politics. And I think that compounds this sort of abuse. Because let's be quite clear about this. If you have a lot of financial resources, you can get the best lawyers and you can get support that other people who don't have those resources. More worryingly, billionaires now exercise disproportionate influence in American politics. So I think New Zealand should be looking at what's happened in the United States and, first of all, take some comfort in the fact that we have MMP, a good electoral system. Anybody who forms a government in this country, by definition, has to have about 48% of the vote, which usually is derived from a coalition of parties. But I think it's important that we make sure that our institutions are responsive and also that we may maintain the standards of transparency that we've come to accept, or expect, I should say. But there's no room for complacency, and we shouldn't gloat over what's happening. In a sense, it's a warning and it's a worry.
And told them that the money was coming from a, class 3 sexual predator?
Tier 1.
Was tier 1's the highest and worst?
No,
I'm the lowest.
I'm the lowest.
You're the lowest. Okay, tier 1, you're the lowest. But a criminal.
Yes.
That the money came from them. What percentage of people do you estimate? I understand you don't like probabilities. Do you estimate would say, I don't care, I want the money for my children?
I would say everyone said, I want the money for my children.
Did they know where the money came from?
If you told them,
if I told them the devil, 100%.
The devil
himself
said, I'm going to exchange some dollars for your child's life.
Do you think you're the devil himself?
No, but I do have a good mirror.
It's a serious question.
Sorry.
Do you think you're the devil himself?
I don't know. Why would you say that?
In terms of New Zealand politics and our system, do you think that it is impenetrable?
No. There are actors who want to influence the political agenda here, and I'm sure they target particular political leaders, and not only political leaders, MPs and local government officials. I think the old expression, there's no such thing as a free lunch, applies here. It's important that I think, and I know the GCSB they've alerted this, that there are foreign actors that want to influence New Zealand's domestic politics, and we shouldn't be naive about that. New Zealand, although sometimes politicians say it's a small state and it doesn't matter to anyone, that's completely untrue. First of all, we're not as small as we think we are. In land space terms, the country is bigger than the UK. And secondly, we may have a relatively small population, but it's comparable to countries like Denmark and Norway, which do not consider themselves small countries. And we're next door. A close neighbour is Australia, 1,000 kilometres away. But these countries sometimes have more soft power rather than hard power. But they are tempting targets for countries which want to extend their views and their influence. The other thing I would add, Chelsea, is that many of the assumptions under which Australia and New Zealand have operated have crumbled in recent years. Both Australia and New Zealand have operated under what's called the International Rules-Based Order. And that's the majority of countries, 180 countries plus in the world, depends on something called an International Rules-Based Order. This is a vision of international relations based on rules, principles, and procedures, agreed procedures. That has come under pressure from several sources. Firstly, authoritarian states like China, but also Russia, which first of all illegally annexed Crimea in 2014, and then launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. At the same time, the United States has contributed to the erosion of international rules-based order by illegally invading Iraq. And now we have an administration, the Trump administration, that has territorial claims on both Canada, a liberal democracy, and Denmark. It wants to own Greenland. So
I suppose you can't kidnap another country's leader under an international rules-based order either.
So without labouring the point, we've seen, unfortunately, a steady erosion of the sort of world that New Zealanders and Australians would like to live in. And that's a bigger reason for being more vigilant, because countries that we formerly, I mean, let's be quite clear, how many of us would have taken seriously the idea that Mr. Trump, a second Trump administration, would seriously say to Canadians, you should become the 51st state? I was in Canada in January 2025 on a professional visit there, and the Canadians I met across the board were utterly furious and insulted by this and took it extremely seriously. We do have politicians in this country who like to downplay the assault on the international rules-based order that's going on. Some of them say, oh, you shouldn't take Trump seriously. Well, tell that to Denmark and tell that to the Canadians and tell that to American citizens, particularly in places like Minnesota, where they're seeing the Constitution flouted. So I do think for all these reasons, New Zealand has to be more vigilant than perhaps before. And to take up Mr. Carney's point at Davos, the recent Davos meeting, he said that middle powers and small countries should look to organise themselves and shouldn't allow themselves to be bullied by or caving in to great powers. And let's be quite clear, at the moment, Mr. Trump's vision of how the world should be organised is completely and radically different from previous US presidents. He wants the world to be built around what could be called a concert of great powers, a sort of 19th century idea, sort of back to the future vision of the 21st century. What does that mean? It means that 5 countries, and I'm not, let's be quite clear about this, I'm simply citing here the National Security Strategy of the United States, a document which was published in December 2025. In that document, the Trump administration quite explicitly says that great powers should run the world, and those powers, with not surprisingly America as head of the table, will be the United States, China, Russia, Japan, and India. So how about the rest of the world? Well, they'll have to pick up the crumbs that's left. So this is a real challenge to New Zealand. And I think it's a big reason why we should follow developments closely in the United States, particularly, unfortunately, what appears to be an authoritarian turn within America's system of governance. I know it's worrying many Americans. And by the way, we, like many other liberal democracies, have tended to downplay and adopt a softly approach to the Trump administration. This has been based on the assumption that New Zealand and Australia, by being very nice to Mr. Trump, not reacting to his territorial ambitions against our allies, we could nudge him into a more reasonable position, coax him in, moderate him, flatter him, and gradually maneuver him into a much more moderate position. That clearly
a very
hasn't
she'll
worked.
be right attitude, hey?
Unfortunately, yeah. So, in a sense, the Epstein files crisis is yet another reminder that countries like New Zealand and Australia have to be vigilant, not only about the way things are being dealt with at home, but also about the changing international environment they find themselves in.
Thanks for joining us, Robert.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is hosted and produced by me, Chelsea Daniels. Kane Dickey is our studio operator, Richard Martin, our producer and editor, and our executive producer is Jane Yee. Follow The Front Page on the iHeart app or wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time for another look beyond the headlines.